The Métis are a distinct Indigenous people. Métis communities in Ontario emerged along waterways and fur trade routes before Canada was a country. These historic Métis communities, which persist to the present day, develop their own customs, traditions, and identities that are rooted in kinship, relationship to the land, and a distinctive culture and way of life.
Being a half-breed in Mattawa and being a Métis in Mattawa, it was not looked down upon because they were the majority of the people. The majority of the people that were there were like themselves.
Mattawa, which means meeting of the waters, is at the confluence of the Mattawa and Ottawa rivers, both major transportation corridors. These waters were known as the Fur Trade Highway, used by voyageurs for centuries as a route to the rich fur-bearing grounds west. The Fur Trade Highway was instrumental to the fur trade and, by extension, to Canadian history. The Mattawa creation story is a fascinating one. In the 1720s, the Compagnie du Nord post was established on Lake Temiskaming, as well as posts Lake of Two Mountains, Carillon, and Lanceau. In 1784, the Northwest Company was created, and Fort Temiskaming became a separate Northwest Company department. By the early 1800s, Fort Ladonde was established at the mouth of the Lavaz River between Mattawa River and Lake Nipissing, representing the first permanent fur trade post of the Northwest Company in the region. In 1821, fur trade rivals Hudson's Bay Company and Northwest Company merged. After the amalgamation, cost-cutting measures were introduced, which reduced the number of fur traders who remained in the fur trade. The practice of paying to resettle retired traders and their families in Red River also ended.
It was the fur industry that got it started. Some of them were trappers, some of them weren't trappers, but they were supporting of the trappers, meaning they cut firewood, they built canoes, they developed skills planting some gardens. The trappers basically needed support. They would head off into the wilderness and trap, but if they didn't have the supplies, they didn't go very far.
Here it was a good trading center because you had people coming from Lake Temiskaming, from all northwestern Ontario, and then the other route was the Ottawa River out through Lake Nipissing to the French, and then up to Georgian Bay and Lake Superior and all that area. So this was kind of a crossroads for everyone to come into and meet.
Mattawa had a lot to offer, and when the Métis became trappers and hunters and loggers and whatnot, and Mattawa had all that for them. You know, the fur trade was a big thing in those days. The trapping was good, and the waterway, we had the Mattawa River, we had the Ottawa River, and the beaver was one of the primarily trapping animals that they used to trap and whatnot, and the hunting was excellent. So it was a draw. It attracted the people, and they stayed. You know, a lot of them, some left, but a lot stayed.
Retired traders also began to settle in Mattawa, an economical location that they were familiar with from their voyageur days. One of those that stayed was Roderick Mackenzie. He was discharged from Hudson's Bay Company at Lake Nipissing and moved to this community and urged other Métis to follow. They practiced a way of life they learned from their fur trade fathers and their First Nations mothers. They hunted, fished, trapped, harvested plants and berries, and gathered maple sugar. They established a unique community that was different than their First Nations cousins. They married within the community. Outsiders began to comment on their attributes. They were seen and known as distinct. One of the distinct features of this Métis community, which outsiders noted, was its musical tradition. They spoke primarily French and Indigenous languages, including Michif, Algonquin, and some Ojibwe. They also followed Roman Catholicism, including participation in religious rites, baptism, and godparenting. Jigging and fiddle music were part of community gatherings. As some observers commented, a Christmas meal was followed by a kind of a jig with a mixture of Scotch, Irish, and Indian movement. March 17, 1848. A few of the Bahoys arrived to keep St. Patrick's, and a fiddler having made his appearance. His abilities were for you, may be assured continually called upon. December 25, 1848. Found W. Langevin here, who kingly refreshed me with a few tunes on the violin. June 23, 1853. James Miller went over to Benjamin's camp to hear a few tunes on the fiddle. There were outside threats, but the Mattawa community continued to survive and evolve. In 1871, Mattawa was opened for settlement by the Government of Canada. 2 years later, a boom in the timber industry brought Europeans to the community. The railroad was also established. These new realities translated into a population spike in Mattawa. By 1891, the population ballooned to 12,000. A large number of these new residents were French-Canadian. Despite this wave of newcomers, the 1901 census indicates that the Métis community continued to live in a close-knit, geographically specific part of town. Here they lived beside one another, married into each other's families, worked together, and attended church together. They were their own distinct community.
For the Métis, when I look at all those root families, I can walk down the street and I can see descendants of those families. And to this day, those families didn't move very far, which I think is unique.
When the fur trade slowed down, Mattawa Métis had to find new economical ways to survive.
It got to the point towards the late 1800s that the beaver were getting, there was less of them, so they were going further and further away.
One natural way to survive was guiding. Métis were natural guides for visiting tourists, given their skills and expertise in big game hunting and camping. They possessed the intergenerational knowledge of local waters and had an intimate understanding of local wildlife. They were able to carry heavy camping equipment and possessed a sensitivity to outsiders' comfort. Métis men, including Bastien, Colton, Dodion, England, Ferris, and Mackenzie, were amongst many Mattawa Métis guides who were documented in the 1905 issue of Rod and Gun List of Accredited Guides. They appear in written accounts, drawings, and photographs of visiting men, including Frederick C. Sealis, Frederick Remington, and Julian Ralph. These men attributed much of their success to their Métis guides. Traditional Métis occupations continue in contemporary Métis life in Mattawa.
I think when you say somebody is a guide, it means that you're an avid fisherman and a hunter, and you know a little bit about it. So there are a lot of people that come from south to the northern fishing and hunting, exposed to hunting and fishing. So they love to take a guide in hand, to bring them where the game is and hunting, and then to bring them where the fish are, good fishing on the river. So I do that. I still do quite a bit of that.
I remember a person asking me, in that 100 square miles, I put out, hundreds of traps, and there's no flags, and the person says, how do you remember where your stuff is? And it's either in you or it's not in you. And I think that's probably the best analogy. The Métis hunt as a family. You bring your children, and then you have grandchildren. So you do it as a unit, and it is something that that connects us as a Métis. Trapping is the original that got us here as a Métis. Now there's fishers, you know, the people that were fishers, we're no more or no better than the fishers, but the fur industry is a connection that takes us back to the beginning of our time. It's part of our culture. And I mean, as long as we can hold on to some parts of our culture, we need to do that. I mean, you are a people if you have culture. I am very proud to be Métis.
Yeah, I'm proud that I'm a Métis.
Oh yes, I'm certainly proud to be a Métis.